All right. Ready to dive into some seriously fascinating psychology?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
We're going to explore first impressions.
Oh, yeah.
And labels and how those things can really sway our thinking.
I totally
in
do.
ways we might not even realize.
Yeah.
We've got some cool research to unpack.
Yeah.
Everything from the NBA draft to first dates, job interviews,
Right.
even this wild psychological experiment called the Love Bridge.
Okay.
So let's rewind all the way back to 1984,
Okay.
a pretty pivotal year for basketball fans.
Yeah, I guess.
The Portland Trail Blazers had the second pick in the NBA draft,
Right.
and they made a choice that's still debated today.
What's that?
They passed over Michael Jordan.
Really? Oh, wow.
They went with Sam Bowie,
Mm-hmm.
a center who was, he's talented,
I see.
but he had a history of injuries.
Yeah.
And Jordan went third to the Chicago Bulls,
All right.
and, well, the rest is history.
The rest is history.
It's easy to say in hindsight, Rabbit.
Of course, yeah.
But this is a classic example of the diagnosis bias.
Diagnosis bias.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what's really cool is that economists, Staw and Huang,
Uh-huh.
actually studied this,
Okay.
and they looked at the impact of draft order on players' careers.
Okay.
And what they found was that
Yeah.
players who were drafted earlier
Mm-hmm.
got more playing time,
Interesting.
they were less likely to be traded,
Okay.
and they had longer careers,
Mm.
regardless of how well they actually performed on the court.
So like that initial label of being like
Yeah.
a top draft pick
Yeah.
really stayed with them.
It did. It stuck with them,
Wow.
even when the evidence,
Yeah.
showed otherwise.
Oh, that's crazy.
Talk about a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That is really wild.
Right.
Yeah.
And this bias, it isn't limited to sports.
Yeah.
It shows up
Good
in
point.
all sorts of situations
Yeah.
where we're making judgments based on limited information.
Yeah, definitely.
So if
Right.
draft order,
Can have that kind of impact.
Nice.
Imagine the power of a
That.
single word.
a single word.
Yeah, so there was some researchers at MIT.
Yeah.
They did this really cool experiment.
Okay.
They had students evaluate a guest lecturer,
Okay.
and the twist
Okay.
that they manipulated just one word
Mm.
in his bio.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, so half the students saw him described as warm,
Okay.
while the other half saw him as cold.
Oh, wow.
And that one word
Mm.
completely changed how they perceived him.
Really?
Those who read the word warm
Yeah.
saw him as friendly,
Mhm.
engaging, and even funny.
Wow.
The cold group
Right.
saw the same guy
Whoa.
as aloof,
Okay.
unapproachable, and humorless.
That's incredible.
It's pretty amazing, right? It's
Yes.
like our brains crave these categories,
Yeah.
and we just grab onto
Right.
even the smallest bits of information
Wow.
to make these judgments.
And then those judgments become incredibly sticky.
It's really interesting.
It is. It's like our brains are like little
Yeah.
story-generating machines.
Yeah.
You give them a label,
Mm-hmm.
any label,
Right.
and they'll build a whole narrative around it.
Wow, that's really interesting.
And this has huge implications
Yeah.
for how we evaluate people in all sorts of contexts,
Like
especially in situations like
what?
job interviews.
Oh, job interviews.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, you've got two people meeting for the first time. They're
Right.
trying to make a good impression.
Of course.
They're both relying on limited information,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of pressure to make a connection quickly.
Yeah,
It sounds a lot like a first date, doesn't it?
it really does. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So both these situations are really ripe
Yeah, I see that.
for those snap judgments and biases to kick in.
Yeah, definitely.
And there's research to back this up.
Oh, really?
Professor Alan Huffcutt, he's spent decades studying hiring practices.
Wow.
And he found that unstructured interviews are notoriously bad
Oh, wow.
at predicting actual job performance.
That's really surprising.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought a good interview was key to landing a job.
Yeah, me too.
But
Yeah.
it's not that interviews are completely useless,
Okay.
but the way they're typically conducted
Right.
can be very misleading.
Yeah.
One factor is what's called the mirror-mirror effect.
Okay.
And this is where we tend to favor candidates
Okay.
who remind us of ourselves,
Oh, really?
even if those similarities
Yeah.
aren't relevant to the job.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like we're subconsciously looking for someone
Yeah.
we'd want to hang out with
Yeah.
rather than the best person for the role.
That's a good point.
Right.
Yeah.
And this isn't just a hunch. There's solid research
Wow.
that supports this.
That's crazy.
And so if
Yeah.
first impressions can be so misleading in job interviews,
Right.
does the same thing happen
I'm
in other big life decisions?
like what?
like finding a partner
Oh,
or buying a house.
Right.
I mean, it's the same principle at play, right?
Yeah.
Think about those studies that follow couples over time.
Yeah.
Researchers found that people can often predict
Right.
the longevity of a relationship very early on.
Yeah.
Even when they're fully aware of the red flags. It's like those college freshmen who swear their relationship will last forever,
Right.
even though they can list all the problems they're already having.
Wow. Yeah.
And so it's like our desire for something to work out, whether it's a relationship or a job or a house, can really blind us to the reality of the situation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So what's the solution?
Right.
Is there any way to avoid these traps and make better decisions?
I mean,
Or are
hopefully.
we just doomed to repeat these patterns?
I hope not.
I mean, there is hope.
Right.
Professor Huffcutt suggests what he calls a Joe Friday approach.
Joe Friday.
Yeah, like the detective from Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am.
Whoa, right.
So instead of asking these vague, open-ended questions, we should focus on specific past experiences and work-related scenarios by sticking to concrete examples and focusing on relevant skills. We can minimize those irrelevant factors and get a much more accurate prediction of how someone will actually perform.
That makes sense.
The challenge is that even experts sometimes struggle to put this into practice. We're all drawn to that sense of personal connection and that allure of trusting our gut instinct.
Our gut.
Right. So it's like we're fighting against our own wiring.
That's interesting.
Which makes me wonder if we're this susceptible to bias in our personal lives.
Right.
What about fields where objectivity is supposed to be paramount? Like medicine, for example.
Oh, medicine,
And so let's take a look at the dramatic increase in bipolar diagnoses in children, which some have called a bipolar epidemic.
A bipolar epidemic. Wow.
Yeah.
That's really serious.
From 1994 to 2003, the number of kids diagnosed with bipolar disorder shot up 40 times.
40 times.
40 times.
That's wild.
But here's the thing. Suicide rates among young people didn't increase during that same period. So if the actual number of kids with bipolar disorder didn't go up, what was driving that huge increase in diagnoses?
That's a good question.
Well, part of it has to do with how we define bipolar disorder. So the DSM, which is the manual used to diagnose mental disorders, they broadened the definition in 1980 to include less pronounced symptoms. So things that might have been considered normal ups and downs before were suddenly seen as potential signs of bipolar disorder.
I see.
And then you add in the influence of the pharmaceutical industry. Drug companies started heavily marketing these new medications for bipolar disorder in the 1990s. And so it was like a perfect storm. You've got a broader definition and aggressive marketing. And it created this snowball effect where clinicians were just seeing bipolar disorder everywhere.
Wow.
Right? And it's a perfect example of how a diagnosis can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're looking for something, you're more likely to find it, even if it's not really there.
That's true.
And it brings up some really important questions about how we approach diagnosis and treatment. Like, does having a label always lead to better outcomes?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, it seems like that's the assumption.
All right. Of course,
Getting a diagnosis is the first step to understanding and addressing the problem. But what if the diagnosis itself is flawed?
I see.
For example, studies on SSRIs, which are commonly prescribed.
Dopamine to sort depression and anxiety have found that they're often no more effective than placebos.
Really?
And so in some cases, the treatment might not be doing any good.
Wow.
And could even have negative side effects.
That's scary.
It is, right?
Yeah.
It really highlights how important it is to have solid evidence before jumping to conclusions and prescribing treatments.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it leads us to another crucial point, the impact of labels on the person being diagnosed. And this is where the chameleon effect comes in.
The chameleon effect.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What is the chameleon effect?
So the chameleon effect is the idea that we unconsciously take on the characteristics that others ascribe to us.
And we're going to explore a fascinating experiment with Israeli soldiers to illustrate this.
Hold on, we're going from overdiagnosis of children to Israeli soldiers. I'm sensing a connection.
Yeah.
But help me out.
So the connection is the power of labels.
Okay.
So in this experiment, researchers randomly assign soldiers to categories labeled high potential, regular, or unknown. Now, these labels were completely arbitrary.
Okay.
But
this is where it gets really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The soldiers who were labeled high potential actually performed significantly better on tests.
Really?
Even though those labels were meaningless.
So just being told they were high potential made them live up to that expectation.
Yeah, basically.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Does this apply to other areas of life too? Okay, like what?
Like, think about how being told you look good can boost your confidence, which then affects how you act.
Right.
Or, on the flip side, if someone constantly criticizes you, you might start to internalize those negative assessments.
I see. It's like we become a reflection of the labels people put on us.
I agree.
And the impact can go beyond just feeling good or bad.
Okay.
For example, a study on senior citizens and hearing loss found that those with negative perceptions of aging actually experienced greater hearing decline.
Really?
Wait, are you saying their beliefs about aging actually affected their physical health?
Yeah, and it's not just hearing loss. Negative stereotypes about aging have been linked to all sorts of issues.
Like what?
Memory problems, cardiovascular disease, even shorter lifespans.
Really?
It's incredible how powerful our beliefs can be in shaping our reality.
Oh, okay. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We've gone from the NBA draft to job interviews, medical diagnoses, Israeli soldiers, and now hearing loss.
Wow.
All connected to this power of labels and first impressions.
That's wild.
I feel like we're building up to a grand finale here, something that brings it all together.
Right, okay.
And so let's end with the captivating Love Bridge study.
The Love Bridge study?
Yeah, it perfectly shows this interplay between our bodies and minds and how context can totally change our perceptions and even our feelings.
Wow, okay, tell me about this Love Bridge.
All right, so picture this.
Okay.
There are two bridges. One is a sturdy wooden bridge, and the other is a swaying suspension bridge high above a canyon.
Oh, wow.
A female research assistant approached men after they crossed each bridge. I bet the men who crossed that scary suspension bridge were way more likely to, be smitten with her.
Oh, yeah, probably.
And you would be right.
Really?
The men who crossed the shaky bridge were far more likely to call the research assistant afterwards.
Well,
they took their physiological arousal, that adrenaline rush from the bridge, for romantic attraction.
Well, so they weren't actually more attracted to her.
No, not necessarily. Their bodies were playing tricks on them.
That's wild.
And so it highlights just how many hidden influences are shaping our thoughts and feelings and actions all the time.
Right.
And so what does all of this mean for our listener?
Yeah, that's the question.
That's exactly what we'll be exploring in part 2 of this deep dive, so stay tuned.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we've seen how first impressions and labels can lead to some pretty surprising outcomes.
Yeah, totally.
But it seems like there's another powerful force at play here. And that's our sense of fairness.
Oh, fairness.
You're absolutely right. We've talked about how our brains crave categories and they try to make sense of the world.
Yeah.
Well, our sense of fairness is another way we try to create order and meaning.
I see.
It's this deep-seated drive that influences our choices in all sorts of ways.
Definitely.
It's like we have this internal scale that's constantly weighing things out, trying to make sure things are balanced and just...
Exactly.
Nah.
And when that scale pips
Yeah.
too far in one direction.
Mm-hmm. Right.
When we perceive something as unfair, it can trigger some really strong reactions.
It can.
Yeah.
You know what it reminds me of?
What?
That episode of The French Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Okay.
Where the audience intentionally gave the contestant the wrong answer.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Remember that?
Yeah.
It completely baffled the producers because they were used to American audiences.
Right.
Who almost always try to help the contestant win.
Of course.
But the French audience seemed to think the contestant didn't deserve the money.
Really?
Because he wasn't answering the questions correctly.
Wow, so it's like they were saying,
yeah,
hold on, it's not fair for him to win €1 million.
Right.
If he doesn't even know basic geography.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how our sense of fairness can override logic.
I see.
And even our own self-interest.
Wow.
And we see this play out in all sorts of social interactions, from everyday situations to high-stakes negotiations.
So are you saying that fairness is always more important to us than logic?
Not necessarily always.
Okay.
But it's a powerful motivator.
It is, yeah.
There's this classic experiment where people are asked to split a sum of money with a partner.
Okay.
So the splitter gets to propose any division they want,
okay,
but the receiver has the power to accept or reject the offer.
Right.
Right. And if the receiver rejects the offer, they both get nothing.
I see.
And what's fascinating is that people consistently reject unfair offers.
Wow.
Even if it means losing money themselves.
Really?
It's like they'd rather walk away with nothing than be treated unfairly.
That's crazy.
Precisely.
And this sense of fairness isn't limited to humans.
Oh, really?
Studies have shown that even primates exhibit a sense of fairness and will reject unequal rewards.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It suggests that this drive for fairness is deeply ingrained in our social nature.
I see.
Something that's been essential for cooperation and survival throughout our evolutionary history.
Yeah, it makes sense when you think about it. If you're living in a group, you need to trust that everyone is going to contribute their fair share.
Right.
And that resources will be distributed equitably.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the group won't function effectively.
Yeah. So how does this play out in the real world?
Oh, in the real world, like in the workplace.
Like in the workplace, for example.
Right. That's a great example.
Okay.
Because studies have consistently shown that employees are more motivated and productive when they feel like they're being treated fairly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If you feel like your boss is playing favorites or that your hard work isn't being recognized, it's going to sap your motivation.
Totally.
Absolutely.
But those perceptions of fairness and have a real impact on a company's bottom line.
How so?
When employees feel valued and respected, they're more likely to go the extra mile and to stay with the company longer.
So fair treatment leads to happier, more productive employees, which translates into better results for the company.
Exactly.
It's a win-win.
It is.
And I remember reading about a study on car dealerships. Oh, car dealerships. Okay.
And they reported greater satisfaction in their relationships with manufacturers who treated them fairly, even if they weren't getting the best deals.
Really? Wow, that's interesting.
Exactly. It's not just about the outcome. It's about the process.
Right.
If people feel like they've been treated fairly and respectfully, they're much more likely to accept an outcome, even if it's not ideal.
I see.
That's really interesting. It seems like this has huge implications for leaders and managers.
Of course.
Especially when they have to deliver tough news, like a rejection or a layoff. Doing it in a fair and transparent way can make a huge difference in how it's received.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
And there's another crucial aspect of fairness that comes into play here.
What's that?
The power of having a voice.
Remember that study with convicted felons?
The one where they were actually more satisfied with their trials if their lawyers spent more time with them, even if they ended up with longer sentences.
Yeah, that's the one.
At first glance, it seems counterintuitive, you think. Spending more time with a lawyer who couldn't get you a better deal would just make you more frustrated.
Totally.
But it wasn't about the outcome, was it?
No.
It was about feeling heard and having their concerns acknowledged.
Right. Even if you don't get the outcome you want, knowing that someone listened to you and took your perspective into account can make a huge difference.
Totally.
And this principle applies far beyond courtrooms.
Oh, okay.
It's relevant in all sorts of relationships.
Like what?
Like if you're having a disagreement with a friend or a family member, just taking the time to really listen to their side of things can go a long way towards resolving the conflict.
Precisely. It's about acknowledging the other person's feelings and validating their perspective.
I see.
It shows respect even if you ultimately disagree.
Okay, so we've got this deep-seated drive for fairness, this need to feel heard and understood.
Yeah.
But it seems like these concepts can be pretty subjective.
Of course.
And vary quite a bit depending on the culture, right?
You're absolutely right.
Remember how we talked about the French Who Wants to Be a Millionaire audience?
Oh, yeah.
They were totally willing to sabotage the contestant.
Right.
But American audiences are usually rooting for them to win big.
Yeah, they are.
And so it baffled the producers.
Yeah, I bet.
Because they weren't familiar with the cultural norms at play.
I see.
So what was going on with that French audience?
Yeah, what was going on there?
Well, Jeffrey Hosking, who's an expert in Russian history, offered some really interesting insights.
Oh, really?
He pointed out that in traditional Russian peasant communities, there was this strong emphasis on community and conformity.
I see.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So how does that relate to the French game show?
That's a good question.
Well, Hosking suggests that this emphasis on community and conformity carried over into Russian culture more broadly.
I see.
It wasn't specific to France, but it helps explain why the audience might have reacted that way.
Right.
So it wasn't just about the game show. It was about a deeper cultural value system that prioritizes
the collective good over individual achievement.
That's a good way to put it.
And so it's clear that we can't assume everyone has the same ideas about fairness and what constitutes acceptable behavior.
Right.
Our cultural backgrounds shape our values and how we perceive the world in such profound ways.
They do,
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that we need to be aware of our own cultural biases and how they might influence our judgments and interactions with others.
Okay, so we've explored a ton of fascinating research on first impressions, labels, and fairness. But I'm still wondering, what can we actually do about it?
Right. Good question.
How can we become more aware of these sways and make better decisions?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
And that's one that we'll dive into.
In the final part of this deep dive. Okay, so we've seen just how powerful these unconscious biases can be.
Yeah, it's really incredible.
But knowing about them is only half the battle.
It is, yeah.
How do we actually put this knowledge into action? And make better decisions?
That's the question.
Give us the goods.
Okay, well, the good news is just by becoming aware of these biases, we've already taken a step towards mitigating their influence.
So awareness is key.
Yes.
What else can we do?
Yeah. Well, one of the most effective strategies is to cultivate a healthy skepticism of your own judgments, especially when you're forming a first impression. Remember, our brains love to categorize and label, but those initial assessments aren't always accurate.
It's like we need to become our own personal fact checkers.
I like double-checking our assumptions and looking for evidence that might challenge our initial impressions. So ask yourself, what information am I basing this judgment on? Is it relevant? Is it the whole picture? Am I overlooking something?
Those are good questions.
It's like when you buy a used car. You don't just take the seller's word for it, right?
No.
You get a mechanic to check it out.
Of course.
Look for any hidden problems. And so we should apply that same level of scrutiny to our own judgments.
I agree.
Especially when making important decisions, whether it's hiring someone, entering a business deal, or even choosing a romantic partner.
Okay.
We need to be aware of those potential blind spots.
Right.
So be skeptical, challenge our assumptions. What else can we do to become more objective?
Well, seeking out diverse perspectives is crucial.
Okay, so like talk to people who have different viewpoints than your own.
I agree.
This can really help you see the situation from multiple angles and uncover any potential biases that you might have missed. It's like getting a second opinion from a doctor.
Totally.
Sometimes a fresh perspective can make all the difference.
Absolutely.
The more viewpoints you gather, the more informed your decision will be.
That makes sense.
This is all great advice.
Thank you.
Any other
tips?
Oh, tips that you can share? Sure.
Okay.
Listen to your gut.
Okay.
But don't let it rule you.
Okay.
Intuition can be valuable, but it can also be misleading.
Especially when it's based on incomplete information or those pesky unconscious biases that we've been talking about.
So it's about finding that balance between trusting your instincts and knowing when to question them.
Exactly.
How do we know when to trust our gut and when to be more analytical?
Well, creating a system for decision-making can help. For example, if you're hiring someone, use a structured interview process that focuses on relevant skills and experience rather than relying on that gut feeling or personal chemistry.
Remember Professor Huffcutt's
Joe
Joe Friday approach?
Just the facts.
Just the facts.
Yeah.
It's about taking a more systematic approach to gathering information and evaluating candidates.
I see.
And while it might seem counterintuitive, sometimes the best way to make a truly objective decision is to remove some of that human element from the equation.
Okay, now that's interesting.
So are you suggesting we hand over the reins to robots and algorithms?
Not entirely.
Okay.
But there are definitely situations where incorporating more objective measures can be helpful.
Like when?
Well, remember that experiment where people were more willing to accept an unfair split of money if it was proposed by a computer?
Yeah, because we don't expect computers to be fair in the same way we expect it from other humans.
Of course.
We see them as more neutral and objective.
Exactly.
And so in situations where fairness is a key concern, using algorithms or other data-driven tools can really help mitigate our own biases.
That makes sense.
It's like we're leveraging technology to overcome our own human limitations.
A tool that's becoming increasingly relevant as we navigate a world with so much data and information.
Okay, so we've got a lot to think about.
We do.
Be skeptical, seek diverse perspectives, balance intuition with reason, and even consider using technology to help us make more objective choices.
I agree.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up this deep dive?
Sure. I think the most important takeaway here is simply recognizing that we all have these biases. None of us is immune. But by understanding how these biases work, we can start making more conscious and informed choices.
It's like we're upgrading our mental operating system.
I like that.
Installing a new awareness patch.
Exactly.
And just like any software, it requires ongoing maintenance and updates.
It does.
So keep learning. Keep questioning and keep striving to make decisions that are truly aligned with your values and goals.
Well said.
And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
Think about a recent time when you formed a strong first impression of someone or something. Now challenge yourself to consider alternative viewpoints. Maybe some information you might have overlooked.
I see.
Could your initial diagnosis be swaying your thinking even now?
That's a good point.
Food for thought as you navigate this fascinating world of first impressions and labels.
It's been a pleasure.
It has. It's been great exploring these ideas with you.
Well, likewise.
Until next time.
Yeah.
Keep those minds open and curious.
Sounds good.